We all have problems, but sometimes there's just that one problem. That problem, you might be saying, I don't know how to fix it. I don't have the method. I don't have the system. I don't have the process. I don't have the resources. I don't have the right people. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough. I don't have customers. We've all been there. We've all been frustrated. We've got that problem and we don't know how to solve it. The greatest minds have solved that problem. And I want to bring them to you so you do not have to be faced with that problem anymore. There's always that problem. But how do we solve it? Hello, Jack, my friend. I'm so excited for today. I can hardly stand it.
How you doing? Yes, this should be a good topic. Good topic. We've been working on this for a while.
We have. So, Jack, rather than me sitting here talking about how great and wonderful you are and what an amazing human you are, first and foremost, never mind your brilliant mind, I just want to ask you, did you share this?
Of course I've shared it. I was just putting it out while you were introducing there.
Oh, I love it. No, in all seriousness, no. Talk a little bit about your career trajectory and how you got to be where you are today.
Well, I started doing computer programming in high school. I actually had my own company in high school, and then through college, without going through 4 or 5 different companies over 25 plus years. Basically, though, I did a lot in the CRM space, a lot in the business intelligence space, and did a ton in the .com space in the 2000s. Worked for both Oracle and Teradata as large vendors, so I got to see that side of the business. And then did an aviation software company the last 10 years or so that's finally been sold, and I'm just about out of 90% out of it now, trying to fully get out of that company.
We've had a few conversations about that particular company.
Yeah, they it's been a journey with that company. All good, but so we're on now to working on end-to-end results and trying to help companies scale their technology, scale their business, work with both their IT and business staff, to be honest, because a lot of times that's more the issue than the technology.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think one of the best stories that I heard when we were down in Orlando not too long ago, and you were talking about how you pioneered something I think you were working at Oracle at the time.
Oh, just after Oracle. So
talk a little bit about that so people kind of understand and get us.
Yeah, at Oracle, I did a lot. I was like a global CTO for data warehousing and stuff. And then I got hired by a startup called MatchLogic, and we invented the 1x1 pixel that tracks you around the internet. So you can thank our company way back then. Doesn't exist anymore. It's been bought and sold several times. The patents have expired. But long story short, we couldn't process a day's worth of clicks in a day. So I got together with several vendors, eventually Teradata, a couple companies Oracle ended up buying that were independent at the time. We created real-time data warehousing. So back then you had to wait a day, three times a day. Maybe you got your reports. In this case, now you could get them basically to the minute, to the 5 minutes, basically real time. And that was very new technology back then. I did a lot of speaking all over the world on how to set those up.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked a lot about that, right? About some of your previous work and how that's really helped you to define and figure out what companies have real value in the market when they're trying to pitch and so forth. And so that's really the goal of today. We want to solve the problem because you and I have been, most recently I was involved with a pitch marathon here in Canada, and I seriously, by the time, I don't know who was advising these teams, but it was just like, wow, like, we don't as investors care about, and we know we've got investor networks as well. We don't care about the features. We don't care about the market size. We care about what is the problem, how, what's the money that you want, and how are you going to get our investment back? So talk a little bit about some of the things that you look for, because you're down in Utah, you've got a really big investors network there. pre-seed, seed, venture capital. What, in that demographic of area is, what are they looking for companies?
Well, we call it Silicon Slopes here. In fact, I live on the
Yeah.
hill that is Silicon Slopes. So if you look at Silicon Valley, Austin, Denver, Boulder area, and then Silicon Slopes here in Utah, we've all got a lot of high tech. And they're looking for companies that can scale. But more so, they're looking for owners that they can trust with their money. So good ideas that have to have a decent management team that you can trust, and then a product mix that you can sell. And there's lots of problems with all three of those that I've worked with a lot of companies to solve, but that's the key on that.
Yeah, exactly. And, what do you see the most common mistake that people are making? I mean, we talk about this all the time, and sometimes we're just like, oh my God, like seriously, but what are some of the common problems that you see? I mean,
Yeah.
I know you were involved at a certain event. We talked a little bit about this, and, and you muddled under your breath, like, oh my God, help me, like, right. But that actually ended up resulting in an opportunity for you. So, it's funny how some of our actions or reactions to certain things can really inspire people to connect with us. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the biggest thing I see when these companies are trying to raise money, especially if they're founders and they're either pre-revenue or just into revenue, but they're not big yet, right? They're under 200-300 employees. They might even just have 5 or 10 or 5 even. But long story short, they tell the story of the product. They tell their story like they're talking to a customer. And you're not talking to a customer. You're talking to the investor. The investor wants to know, how much money am I putting in? You said this earlier in this session, right?
Yeah.
When am I going to get it back? Is it guaranteed? And then what's the path to get there? Right? They really don't care if your uncle's brother was whoever or how many kids you have. I mean, that's all interesting. They may get into that over time as they invest. But as far as the initial pitch, it's not very relevant.
Well, and I think it's been my experience, and you and I have been involved in several pitch decks now trying to get money. And we've got some clients that you and I are working on together to help them find funding. So if you're looking to invest in a company, please reach out to Jack or I. Or if you've got an idea or you're looking for, pre-seed, after seed, Series A round funding, whatever it may happen to be, reach out to us as well. But I think one of the big problems I see, and you tell me if I'm wrong, is we have some really talented founders, like exceptionally talented, really great ideas. They might even have market share currently and are looking, for that hockey stick pendulum. The problem is that their founders invested emotionally into the product, and they're so invested in, like you said, the fact that they want to sell the idea as opposed to sell why an investor wants to purchase or sell why the investor actually wants to invest, not just in you and your team, but in the idea. And so what is the one financial acumen that you would suggest would be the best way for a founder to really start to knowledge up on the best way to present that idea from a financial perspective?
Well, I think first of all, you should never, for an initial meeting, you can have your 30, 40 slides. You're going to get through 5 or 10. So have that presentation in 5 or 10. And then from a finance perspective, you can do this either way. It depends on who you're talking to. Some investors like to see the numbers first, and then they don't even want to know what the company is. They want to see the numbers first so they can put that in their head and then talk about the rest of then talk about the product space and TAM and all that other good stuff.
Well, and I think
some want to just see, hey, this is in travel, or this is in, technology,
exactly.
or this is a social app, and then show the numbers and then get into the pitch deck on why you're going to grow, how he's going to get his money back, and what's guaranteed.
And you made a good point. Is that know your investor? Number one, know who you're speaking to, because we belong to a group. It's where we met. We met through JT Foxx as the founders, right? You've been there for a while, and I invested in going into the to the network with JT, and know your, like, when people are pitching to us as a collective group and pitching to JT. you need to understand, who are you speaking to? And like you said, every investor is different. Would you say that the majority want the ask and what the money is first? Or would you say that that's unique in perspective and it's more about understanding the problem first and then the dollars?
I don't know. It's, you really got to ask what they want to see, but I would say this: the higher the net worth, the less they care about the product details. So they may get into them over time through due diligence, but on that initial presentation, the less they care about the product details. So the higher the net worth the person, if they're a billionaire, they're going to want to see the numbers. What space am I in? Like I said, travel, technology, whatever, social media, whatever. And then what's your plan? What's your product and plan to grow? Right? They don't really care if you have this feature or that feature. They might care about patents and things like that, but they're certainly not going to care that, you know, you have a plus sign and they have an ad sign, or whoever the heck knows, right? So that kind of thing. Making that up, but you get the idea. Getting into the details of your product is a bad idea on that initial presentation to most high net worth people. Again, there'll always be follow-ups where they're going to want to go into that detail generally before they give you the money. So you'll have time to do that.
Yeah. And I think too, even when you're doing that, I think one of the good recommendations is don't get caught in industry jargon, because what happens is that doesn't matter unless they're really specialized in your particular industry that you're presenting to, they don't understand the jargon. And so you start using all these words that nobody understands. And now all of a sudden you got to have a dictionary for the conversation. And we've seen that happen a few times.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. We've done a couple that have been outside our space. You know, I worked in travel for a while, so I had a good feel for that with the aviation stuff.
Yeah.
But they were throwing around terms that only somebody that had implemented an aviation system would know. And you know, you and I took all that out of the presentation, put it into backup slides.
Exactly. Well, and it's funny because when you're dealing with software developers, and you would know this space much better than I know this space, but they get so caught into the features of the software, even in deep dive, right? Like when you go into the deep dive and now you're in your second conversation, nobody, like, we don't need to understand. The investor doesn't need to understand all the finite details. They just need to understand, how does it function?
And they want to know why you're different, why you win versus the competition. If they're, and never say there's no competition. There's always competition. It's just a matter of, is it a direct competitor, an indirect competitor? You know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, everybody was using the term disruptive. You had to be disruptive to get money. That term's not used quite as much anymore, but those kinds of things though. Why are you different? Why will you win versus, again, each little widget that's in your product?
And it does boil down to team, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I think, you know, that question really signals to the investor, do you really know your market? I think, and that's really important too. Like, are you a young investor? Are you an older investor? Have you been in the industry for a long time? I think that's really important. How does one really understand how to pitch what that differentiator is? And it can't be just because you believe it to be true, right? Like, how do they articulate? And we've seen that. Oh no, I know. I believe I've got the best idea. Like, yeah, great, but nobody cares, right? So how do they articulate that in a way to show that they have the acumen behind what they're trying to?
Well, how have you tested your idea? If you just come to an investor with an idea and you've got a prototype and nobody's bought it, nobody's seen it, why are you wasting your time? Excuse me. If you have there's been numerous deals that we've looked at where they've had, say, let's take an app, 500 people on an app, right? But they haven't proven they can market it and sell it. These are just their beta users or their friends and family users, things like that. So I think the key is your idea. How is the market accepting it? It doesn't have to have 10,000 users when you go to the investor, but it better have more than friends and family so that you can validate that the way you're going to distribute this app is going to work. The way you're going to sell this app is going to work.
Well, and I think you bring up
that's an application example versus a product, but similar.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think too, here's the other thing that we talk about lots when we're vetting deals, especially that have got a software component behind them, is that, you think that you're going to need $1 million in your testing phase. And you and I are both giggling for various reasons, because we can think off the top of our head without listing anybody's names. But why is that? Why are we giggling? Why is that not the reality?
Well, software is expensive. You always need more money than you think. So, and I'm guilty. I used to be guilty of this in my younger career, right? If I go back 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I thought about how much does it take to build it, right? I didn't really think about the testing, the rollout, the marketing, all that other good stuff. Maybe 20 years ago now I'm thinking about it. But anyway, point is that it takes a lot of money.
You mean a few hairs ago?
A few hairs ago, a lot of hairs ago, actually. But no, the real problem here is that software always takes longer and more money than you think. So when people come to us and go, I can do it for $1 million, immediately during any kind of due diligence, I'm looking for, why is it not 3? Why is it not 1.5? Why is it not 5 million? Right. And some of these deals have come to us with $750,000 million, and the right numbers have been 3 to 5 million when we've done the due diligence. Now they don't have to collect all that up front, right? We can figure out how to bucket it and tranche it. But representing the investor that you can get to X number of revenue with, Y number of investment, that's not really, a lot of times it's not true. You're asking for $1 million to get to a $10 million revenue, but really it's going to take 3 million to get to that 10 million revenue.
Yeah. Because you don't know what you don't know. And with software, I mean, things happen, things break that you can't anticipate when you're in the testing phase, right?
Yeah. And that's a software example. You have other examples with hard products, right? With supply chains and manufacturing, shipping, and, warehousing and logistics, stuff like that.
Well, and I mean, we're in the thick of, supply chain problems, right? There's no question about that right now. We've got a note here from, and I apologize, Batwawula, I think is how you say your name. Amen. Praise God. Thank you. Appreciate that. I think that, if you have a comment or question that you'd like to ask Jack or I, please feel free to use the comments below. And if you like what you're hearing so far, don't forget, sharing is caring.
Like us on all the the social media and Instagram and things of that nature. Sure.
Exactly. All right. So tell me a time, Jack, when somebody came to you, and they wanted an investment, and their pitch deck was horrific. You fixed it. You found the actual investor, and you got them the money. What did that, like, how, when you think about timelines, does it vary? Because I know we are working on a couple projects. I mean, we've been working on one project since April to try to get funding.
Yeah, normally it's not weeks. Normally it's going to be months, mainly because you have to align. So the first thing when I see a pitch, other than saying, is this something I want to spend my time on? Do I think this is real? Do I believe in the person, right? I try to vet that out in the first meeting. But in the back of my head, at the same time, I'm thinking about who would I want to invest in this? Who would want to invest in this, and what could be a potential exit strategy? Literally, we're looking at that in the first meeting because that's going to define the type of investor. Are you going after investors that want quick flips, first money in, first money out? They invest bridge loans, initial investments that are taken out by the next larger investment, things like that? Or are you dealing with investors that want to make bets for 3 to 5 year type timeframes? Only a few will go further than 5 years, but those tend to be your billionaires who are hard to get to anyway.
Exactly.
At least I work with a few of them, and they think totally differently than a venture, or I should say, a founding investor or somebody like that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think too, the other component of that is that, you, again, back to, you really need to know your audience, but I think you need to also understand terminology of what's happening when you're looking for investment, especially if you're a new founder, if you've never actually gone through and requested for, any pit, like whether, I don't care if it's Series A or if it's, angel investment or what have you. So, you used a word like collateralized, so let's talk through, what is that? So for the person that's watching right now, they might not know what a collateralized short-term bridge loan is.
Well, basically, if the company went under, how do I get my money back, right? Yeah. So this is really easy to think about in real estate. In real estate, we have a house, a building, a commercial building, whatever it might be, a piece of land. And if I put $1 million in, um, potentially that's my collateral, my guarantee that I can sell that. If you don't do the flip, if you don't improve it, if you decide not to be a landlord anymore, I can take that piece of land or that building and resell it and get my money back.
Yeah.
In technology, it's quite a bit harder because we tend to have just patents and intellectual property. And then product companies, it depends on where they're at, but sometimes you can use your accounts receivable, right, as collateral. You can use, obviously, still the patents and things like that could be turned over to the investor, but those are the types of things that quote unquote guarantee the investment, even though there's still work to do. It's not a true guarantee unless somebody's like got a personal loan against it or a personal guarantee against it, which many founders have to do for their first few investments. So
well, and I was just going to say, in order for them to get that across the finish line, and we've seen where investors actually want a personal guarantee attached to it. How committed are you? The question will then become, okay, if you're asking for $1 million and my return on investment is 3 years from now until you actually are profitable, not driving revenue, but actually profitable, what kind of skin in the game do you have as the founder? Investors are looking for that as well.
Right. And if you're one of those that says, "Oh, I've already put $2 million in and not taking a salary for 2 years," yeah, if you have a lot done, that might be okay. But if you don't have a lot done, you don't have any revenue yet, you're still going to have to be in that mode to get an investment. So
yeah, and then it becomes a question: why have you been in it for 2 years and you're not at revenue yet, right? Like then there becomes to the, what's your strategy, right? Like why are you where you are right now? What's the predicament you put in, and be able to explain that.
Yep. Absolutely. There's just a lot that goes into the vetting of the founder to make sure that if I give you the money, something's going to happen and it's safe.
Yeah. We'll talk a little bit about like LOIs. So letter of intent. So we've got a company right now that we're working with that has 3 really good letters of intent. And some of the questions that have come up is why, if those companies and they're big brands and they have a letter of intent, why have they not invested in the initial build out? And this is a SaaS-based business. So those are the kinds of questions that as a founder, when you're looking for investment, you need to be prepared to answer.
And in some cases, can you turn those into contracts upon delivery of X, Y, Z?
Yeah.
Right. And
good point. Like how strong is that letter of intent? Right.
Right. So, we've asked a couple of I can think of 2 companies in particular, take those LOIs and turn them into TBD contracts upon delivery, right? We'll pay you X, we'll use it once you deliver A, B, and C functionality.
So, okay. So Jack, here's another question that I just thought. So how important, and we're not going to talk about verticals or anything, but how important do you think celebrity endorsement is in the pitch, right? Like as part of the value proposition.
It really depends on the company, right? If you're doing an alcohol brand, if you're doing a new social media type thing, it's probably somewhat important because that's the way those things get off the ground. It may not be important 2 years from now, but it's important to get it off the ground. If you're I'm working with a couple companies in aviation and aerospace, probably not as important there, right?
Yeah.
It's probably important to have good endorsements from people in the field that have vetted your company and your space, but not necessarily. I don't need.
And in fairness to them, they might be a celebrity in their industry.
Right.
Right.
Just like not everybody knows they're not a movie star. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Or a singer or, Ryan Reynolds.
Right.
FYI bucket list. Anyone can help me meet Ryan Reynolds. Just saying. Just had to throw that in there for a moment. But again, it is really important. I think that it shows that you've got reach, right? Like that you're, and that you're willing to do what it takes morally and ethically, obviously, to try to get your product or your service or whatever it may happen to be across the finish line. And that does mean a lot. So it comes back to, who are you as the founder? What effort have you taken to date? And who's the team? So talk a little bit about, in your experience, how important is recognizing who the team is as part of the pitch?
Well, again, this is going to depend on company stage, but the core team, whether it's your technology build, your CFO, your VP of sales, these are the key positions, right?
Yeah.
If you're doing a lot of logistics, your COO or whoever would be in that space is important too. So you're always looking at those roles. Have they been in the industry before? What's their track record? And are they already working with you? Or are they just I had one almost a year ago now, where he had a very nice management team, but upon due diligence, none of them were working for him.
Yeah.
They all said they would work for him upon actually the second investment, not even the first investment, right? So that kind of killed that deal because it was just him and one other person, really, as co-founder, really running the company, and they wanted a lot of money to roll out some metaverse thing that, whatever, won't go there. But point is that it wasn't the real. It was a management team that wasn't really working. Now Lisa and I worked on another one here in the last 6 months, where the management team, it was similar. They weren't all working, but they were all working in the company while doing a day job to fund their salaries, but they were all working in the company actively versus just showing up to a monthly meeting. So that's a little different. That kind of passes the mustard for the most part, versus just some people that said they would come work for you and they attend maybe a monthly status meeting.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of some, like, as we're talking, I'm trying to think of some of the questions that have arisen while we've been doing pitch decks with investors, right? Another one is, another question that has come up where, we had to navigate through to figure out, how do you solve and how do you answer this, is that, are you taking a salary? Like, is part of what you're asking for, and you need to explain, what are you using the money for?
Right.
Is part of it, for salaries, and is that a justifiable expense to use from an investor profile? And in some cases, yes, depending, and in some cases, no. So tell me and the people that are watching, when is the best case scenario to say, you know what, we need to use X amount of dollars, 5%, 10%, 50% of the money, whatever it happens to be, for salaries moving forward?
Well, you're at an inflection point where you can't move forward without those people being full-time.
Yeah.
Right. Or you have some talent, maybe in, again, computers or manufacturing or something. So, but some talented person that you need to bring in, might not be an executive, just a talented key contributor that you need to bring in and start paying as a full-time person. So those are examples where it's okay. When you're looking at founders and your executive team, a lot of times, if you're pre-revenue, that's going to be looked at really heavily. If you're in revenue but unprofitable, that might be okay if you're growing, right? So those are the kinds of things that you need to look at and consider when you're talking to that investor. If I'm pre-revenue, they're going to have a lot of, there's going to be a lot of focus put on that. In revenue, a different type of focus. In revenue, break even and profitable. Okay, you can almost do what you want as long as those salaries are baked in as part of the growth plan.
Okay, so I have a question for you. You and I just vetted. I'm going to politely call it an idea.
Okay.
So, have you, in your experience, they had an idea, they brought it forth, they had a business plan, they had a strategy, but there was no collateralization, there was no asset, right? It was a real estate deal, but the real estate hadn't even been purchased yet, right?
No, it wasn't even under contract.
It wasn't even under contract yet. Have you, in your experience ever, and you've been doing this much longer than I have, ever seen somebody invest just in the idea?
Generally, no, unless they know that space or that idea really, really, really well.
Yeah.
Generally, no. And if they do, what I've seen is they put in their own kind of CEO or president to make sure that it happens, because they are going to take it the direction they want versus maybe where that founder is. But that founder's got a lot of strategic experience that can help drive that, but generally not.
Yeah. And I think so often, like, especially when I was on this marathon, I mean, there was a lot of really great ideas. Again, but they were ideas, right? They, hadn't even had a business plan yet, right? So I think that there's a misconception between what's an idea and what's the reality of an actual investable vehicle, whether that's product, commercial, residential, whatever it happens to be, real estate driven, what have you. So, what would be your first tip for somebody looking for seed investment?
So come with a tight deck, right? But more than that, understand who you're pitching to. So in other words,
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that, right?
network heavily to get in front of the right person for your space, your either product space or application space or technology space, whatever the case might be. Because like I'm working with one group right now. Just started working with them actually about a month ago, maybe give or take. Uh, Before they started pitch to us, they pitched to he said, I haven't vetted it, but over 100 different investors. Okay, if you pitch to 100 investors and you've gotten very little traction, something's wrong. Stop the madness, right? You probably should stop the madness at 10 or 15. But um, but long story short is you know who you're pitching to, because just pitching to anybody, especially VC groups, because VC groups a lot of times they have a partner in each area.
Yeah.
And even the smaller ones do, and they'll take meetings to take meetings because they don't want to miss anything. But whether they're really worth your time to spend half an hour or travel or an hour on a Zoom call, you have to vet that out a little bit. Now it's good to practice. What I mean by that is, if you've done 10 or 15 and you haven't gotten any money, good. You've practiced. Let's figure out what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong. Because a lot of these founders aren't used to speaking to people, especially speaking to people that can control their life from the perspective of an investment. So they get a little nervous sometimes. So, practice is good, but don't waste your time just pitching the pitch.
What do you think for people who are trying to find investors and they don't have great people like you and I to help them? How do they find investors, right? Like, where do they go? I mean, Google's a great resource, but beyond like, let's Google and find an investor, if you got any tips and
almost any, so, you and I are in the founders group, right? Founders group invests in all kinds of things, hundreds of deals a year, over half of real estate, but we look at a lot of stuff, but we don't look at a lot of stuff that's pre-revenue or not profitable yet. We have, but that's not typical.
That's important, meaning not profitable.
Right. That's revenue not typical for that group. Every major city, Salt Lake, I think is 28 or 30 in the US. I don't know what we're growing like a weed here. So whatever. But anyway,
a good weed or a bad weed?
Denver's 5, 6, 7. I haven't looked at the latest population studies, right? All these cities though, Boulder versus Denver versus like Colorado Springs, Utah, the Salt Lake area, we each have, what do I want to call it? Incubator groups or investment groups that specialize in early entry. We're only looking at 20 to 50 to 100 grand, those types of investors versus, first time investors that might put in say 100 to 900 grand or $1 million, up to maybe $1 million. And then others that are looking at $1 million plus, but generally they're going to be looking for people that are in revenue, not always, but what I'm trying to say is locally, there are investment groups. Start networking, call other companies that you have seen go from startup and now their name's on a building, and just try to talk to a couple people there and see who they went to and try to get into their network. They may not have the right investor for you, and they probably won't, but the network of where they found their investor would probably be valid.
That's a good one. Welcome, Charles. Charles has a really great question. What are your thoughts on asking for lines of credit versus equity investments?
Really the line of credit is great if you have something to collateralize it.
Yeah.
Right. And if it's just your accounts receivable, that's going to be less good than hard goods. Most of the investors I work with don't get into the product areas too much because they don't want to deal with liquidating inventory. But there's lots of people that do that. Okay. So I'm not saying that's bad at all. Equity's great early, right? I will tell you, though, I've made the mistake of giving up over 51% of one of the companies I created. And at about, I don't know, when I was at about a 40% ownership, things started to go sideways because some decisions were being made that were the wrong decisions. But I couldn't override every decision at that point and make sure the company stayed straight. So you got to be careful about that 50% ownership. Now, if you're $1 million in revenue and somebody's giving you 10 million, you're going to be under 50%. But most investors are going to want, from an equity perspective, you to be in the game. They don't want you. You've heard this on Shark Tank, even though most of those deals never actually get funded. You've
Yeah,
heard this, right?
yeah, or they get lost in the due diligence.
Right, right. That's where most of them get lost. Yeah.
Hmm.
So the key on that is that they are always saying, I need you to be in the game. I don't want you to be less than 50%. I don't want you to be less than 60%, whatever. But lines of credit are great as long as you've got the right type of investor or bank or financial institution that wants to work in that industry that knows those products.
Well, and the other thing with equity investments too that I would add is that what is the the ask on the other side of that? Like, are you giving just equity, or are you asking equity for is it sweat equity? Is it like that's another option, right? Like we're talking about equity as far as shares, but there's also the sweat equity component of it that as well. And is that an option when you're thinking about lines of credit versus equity investments and so forth? Board advisory shares is another way to pitch on that side, right?
Yeah, but that's typically for your key employees. Like you say, advisory shares. I've got a couple companies that have given me that because I work with them continually now versus just for the investment.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm working with their board on a monthly basis or biweekly basis, whatever. But typically, though, you're not gonna, if you want to get money, it's going to be a line of credit or some kind of equity investment or something in between, convertible note, things like that.
Yeah, yeah. And just tell people what a convertible note is so they understand if they're listening and they go, what is it?
There's lots of different versions of them, but
I know.
I've seen them written up a lot of ways. But the basic premise is they're going to give you, let's say, $500,000 or $1 million. It's debt. You're going to pay them interest. And that at some point in time or at some event that turns to equity. It could be the next investment that it turns into equity. It could be some key metric of sales or profitability where it turns to equity. But typically there's it's a loan where you're paying interest initially, and then it turns to equity upon some event, typically 2 to 4 years down the road. Well, at least 1 year, plus year down the road.
Well, and you said two things. I mean, milestones are really important. So that was a great question. As when do the triggers or the tranches happen, right? And what happens at that particular milestone? And then, of course, as well, how long, right? Like some investors might say, well, I'll take an equity investment, but I want, a return on that in 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. And that might not be your game plan as the founder of the company too. Right. So you need to, as much as, we're talking about understand your investor, understand, you as the founder also have to set your own guidelines as to who you want as an investor. So it is as much an interview process or a pitch to the investor as you actually doing your due diligence on the investor as well as the founder.
Yeah.
Charles has got another question for us. What is preferable in the 250K range? Convertible note, safe, etc.
That's hard to say because I don't know if your company would be worth 100 million one day or worth 10 million one day, right?
Yeah.
But typically things under $1 million are done with convertible notes. I mean, things over $1 million are too, but you can do a lot of things, for that. You can also just give away 10, 15% for that kind of money. Although that would be like the initial investment. You wouldn't do that if you had traction. If you had traction, you probably would, like a convertible note or line of credit or something like that in those situations. So part of this goes to the end game. What's your exit strategy?
Exactly.
So, what I'm trying to say here is that you as a founder, do you want to run this for 10 years? That's not necessarily the right answer. It's not the wrong answer. But, a lot of these companies are built to be bought. I'm working with 3 right now. They're being built to be bought in 3 to 5 years. Whereas other founders are trying to build them for the long term, for the 10-year haul, right? And other founders are wanting, if you don't have an answer for that, like at least put a slide up there that says these are possible exits that could happen, right? We're always for sale for the right price. We're happy to run this for the next 5 years profitably and grow it, right? Just have those options there so they know that you've thought about it.
Yeah. And that's come up quite often. Like we've done a few pitches where they've actually asked, like, what's your exit strategy? And, if you don't have an answer, they're going to be wondering.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So great question, Charles. Thank you for asking. So anything else that you can think of, Jack, that we haven't covered today that, outside of, I mean, we're using lots of industry jargon right now. One of the things that we said you shouldn't do when you're doing an investment, but anything that I haven't asked you that I haven't thought about?
No, I think the key is just if you're dealing with the initial investors, vet out who you're talking to, make sure that they're going to even be halfway interested, or sometimes it's okay. One last point, to do a pitch to an investor that will not invest, but they have a network and they can point you to the right person.
Yeah.
We did that about 2 weeks ago and knew that person probably would not invest, but we also knew they would point us to the right types of people.
Yeah.
And make sure that initial deck is tight, 5-10 slides max. Lisa and I have been able to make most pitches work in 5 to 6, again, initial meeting, not a deep dive, but initial meeting, 5 to 6 slides, but definitely never more than 10.
Yeah. And I think too, like as a founder, I think persistence is key, right? Like, and don't give up. Like, Jack and I, like, I think that is really, really important. Like, how invested are you in making sure that this goes across? And that if you found the right investor and they don't think that it's the right idea, how invested are you in making sure that you are always top of mind for them? Because that goes a long way, more surprisingly than you would think, right?
Yeah.
Well, and a good example is we pitched to a particular investor, one of the companies that we're working with, a month and a half ago, maybe something like that, for sure 6 weeks ago. And, we got a call yesterday saying they want to have a follow-up call. So you never know what's happening in the background. Never be discouraged, because no news sometimes is good news.
Yep. And always follow up no matter what.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And do what you're going to say you're going to do. Yeah.
Always follow up.
And I think too, like, I mean, I've hopped on a plane to just go and meet the founder of an investment deck that we're working on right now, trying to get money, to find out, like, to meet the person, find out the person behind the company. Who are they? Are they really who they say they are? Because Zoom is great, but I can't, like, you can't touch and feel the person.
Well, the key to that is, will the investor trust giving the person $1 million, $3 million, $5 million, whatever the right number is, dollars, and they're going to want to look you eye to eye normally to figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a good point. Is the group that's actually, the guy that the founder who's, or gal that has, founded the company, are they the right person to lead the charge? And sometimes the answer is no. And that could be the hiccup in the investment.
Well, they may be the right person out of the gate, but 2 years down the road, as they scale and it turns more into a sales organization versus a product build organization, things can change over time. So just keep that in mind, right? Yeah. And the last thing I'll say is, if as these investors come back to you, I know one particular investor, he requires 7 meetings before he invests. And he basically says, they can't give me a BS story seven times in a row. I will figure it out, right? Typically, you can figure it out in 3 or 4 meetings, but if somebody's serious, they're not going to put that kind of time in unless they're actually thinking about it. So,
and sometimes it's about looking at what they're not saying, right?
Yeah.
Not what they're saying, and I think that's really important too. Like, what is not being said in the deck. Asking questions that are outside of what the deck is presenting for the idea, right? Yeah. I think that's really important as well.
Good. Yeah, lots of things to think about.
There is a lot of things to think about, right? So one last question. What is the strangest object, idea, whatever, that has come across your desk that you went like, what were these people thinking? Like, it was just a bad idea. Like a really bad idea.
Okay. So lately, I won't give one specific example, but I'll give an area example.
Yeah.
People are coming to us with a bunch of apps that go, I connect person needing ABC services with vendor XYZ. Okay. Tons of these coming through, probably 1 a month, maybe 2 a month, at least to the founders group and other channels that I see. And been there, done that. Why are you wasting your time? Right? There's localized apps for different regions like Chicago and Atlanta and things like that The national apps have proven that they can't do it that well because it kind of has to be regional to get with the contractors. There's lots of reasons that just the people that are there already, unless they fail, and they've also proven it's very hard to scale that, right? Yeah. So I don't know about a dumb idea, but you look at some of these and you go, oh boy, I got to listen to this now for the next 15 minutes and then tell them, unless they've come up with something really intricate, why they should just stop now and do something slightly different.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm thinking of you. I'm not even going to go there. Let's just put that. I'm not even going to go there. All right. So, Jack, you have your own podcast.
Yeah, we have the Business and Tech podcast. There's a YouTube channel for it, as well as Apple, Spotify, and all those. We'll be releasing tonight. So you see it tomorrow or later tonight. One of the longest episodes I've recorded, and it's me and Rob Heitman, one of my IT buddies that I've worked with a long time. We both run technology companies. We both work with lots of different types of companies. And we talk for about 45 minutes. Normally we keep the podcast to 20, 30 minutes. We talk for about 45 minutes on having remote teams, both in the US as well as working with remote teams overseas, how to manage that, the good, the bad, the ugly, and things to watch out for. But remember, we're talking about it from a business perspective of managing it, as well as a technical perspective of how to implement. So that's the idea of the podcast, is to tie those two together, not just be an IT oriented podcast.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to tune into that one because that's I do a lot of work around the remote teaming and connection and content. So I like that.
Yeah. And it's changed a lot after the pandemic. That's what we discussed.
Yes, it has. And they can find you at Jack G at End-to-End Results. What is, and if I asked you today, Jack, who's your ideal customer for end-to-end results, who would that be? So
outside of the investment stuff, which is kind of like 20% of what I do on a day-to-day basis, we help companies scale. So we'll help companies, take their app from 500 people to 5,000 to 15,000 people. We work normally initially on the IT side because that's where they struggle. They've got it out the door, but they struggle to scale it. But we'll also work with the business team on the business intelligence, the marketing metrics, what's working, what's not working, things like that. So that's what we do. We try to help companies go from here to here, and whether that's $0 to $500 to $5,000, or whether that's not typical, obviously, or 1 million to 50 million. That's what we do, though.
Very good. All right. Well, Jack, thanks again, my friend. And we'll see you on the other side of the Zoom.
Other side. Talk to you later. Thanks.
Very good. Thanks for tuning in. If you like what you heard today, please feel free to share and like and comment. Follow me on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, or join me in the Clubhouse. And we'll see you next time on That Problem Solved.